there's going to be a lot of stuff that's difficult about any path, but find what you think is life-giving, energizing. I think that's easier than saying find your purpose. Like that sounds almost kind of too lofty, too aspirational. No, but I think a lot of folks can take a step back and say, am I energized by this, or is this wearing me out?
Yeah.
And if you find energy, I would encourage you to go further down that path.
Hello, my name is Matt Brose with Lockton. In my role, I consult with employers all around the country related to their employee benefits strategy. We're in conversations all the time about how to attract the best talent and get the best out of their people. Work ethic, integrity, those are all traits of people that pursue excellence, and it doesn't even stop there. From the boardroom to the storeroom, we're going to find out what drives those people. Welcome to the excellence culture. This is going to be an excellent adventure. Well, welcome to the excellence culture. Again, my name is Matt Brost, and I am excited. We're celebrating a couple things today. You're going to see I've got some burnt orange, and my guest here has got some burnt orange on. This is Levi Smith. He's the CEO of Franklin Building Supply. And we're good long-term friends, so we're celebrating that to be able to get together and just kind of have a conversation. But then we're celebrating a big football game that happened this last weekend, right?
It's been a long time, if you're a Texas Longhorn fan, since we've really had that sort of dominant, hang your hat on win. And so in celebration of that and knowing that we have the UT connection, and burnt orange just looks good on video. I mean, right. Especially when you got Dallas behind you. We're representing up here in North Texas.
Yes.
Thought, well, I'm going to bring the jersey. Might as well go for number one. I think number one ranking. That's what we're going for.
Safe one.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of choose to believe this year until I'm proven otherwise. So that's the spot I'm in. But it was a fun game on Saturday. Yeah. Always fun to beat Bama, no matter what the team is. Yeah. Just good to see them lose. But when you see Texas being the victor, that's special.
Yeah. Where were you when you watched the game? Were you at home?
So you'll appreciate this. So you and I met one another down in Austin. I've been in Texas for most of my life. We'll get into that story. But going on 8 years ago, moved up to Idaho. So I watched the game from a wilderness campground where I had just enough cell signal to stream the game, and I'd brought my projector and a screen. I had it taped up on the side of our trailer, and I watched the game in a sea of pine trees. And so it was actually
that's pretty
fantastic setting.
That's pretty good. Any Longhorns that are watching should have much respect for it.
Look, I'm telling you, it was fantastic. I was just surrounded by pine trees, just had a lovely drink in my hand, and just watch the game there. So it was a good setting.
That's better than me, but I was in a pretty cool place too. So we got to know each other when we were in Austin. 2003, I think, is when I got to know you, because in 2002...
I tried to get to know you earlier, but you declined.
Oh, really?
Is that what happened? I think that's right, 2003-ish.
So 2002, I left Austin to go live in Florida for a little bit to play golf. Came back to Austin to the church plant that I was involved with, the Austin Stone, and you were heavily involved in the Austin Stone, right. Helping get that thing to where it is now today, which is a pretty cool deal. So, but we got really close, played a lot of board games together.
Yes.
What's your favorite board game these days?
Just you and I. Everyone else watching.
Our families.
Right, yeah.
Yes, our families. What board game are you playing these days? Are you playing a board game?
Well, we have not played as many board games since we left Austin. So we had, we sort of laughed about it. There were a group of friends down there. People came in and out of those groups, but who, were in a season where we all had, either no kids or really young kids, and, I'd put them down on the floor on a blanket, to go to sleep, and, they were asleep right after dinner, and then we'd, hang out and play board games. We're not in that season of life anymore. The children do not just lay down on the floor at someone's house that we're at and go to sleep at 7. So I think that's changed things, but we still bring them along when we go, camping or out into the wilderness and stuff, and enjoy doing that, but not quite as big a part of our lives. It sounds like we're really, really pretty geeky back then. We're making it sound like every night.
we did a lot, though.
So I think the Austin Stone connection's kind of interesting. I don't, you talk about coming back from Florida, but really, me coming into the Austin Stone, which is also where I met my wife, and a lot of not just in terms of my spouse, but a lot of rich friendships there, y'all's included. But I started getting involved. At that time, there were a lot of very young people involved in this church plant, and so they were looking for any individuals that looked like semi-responsible adults, and so that was the main criteria. But then they had these small groups going on, and I found out that the people that had initially sort of helped lead the small groups had just left. And so it was in disarray. And so I think you had left.
Yes.
And so
we were leading all the small
really
groups.
our first, sort of introduction, or first time sort of working on something was me just cleaning up your mess.
Well, there was really nothing. I remember the very first curriculum of the small groups at the Austin Stone was Purpose-Driven Life. Mm-hmm. And people don't like Purpose-Driven Life. Honestly, it started really good conversations.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, I picked it up right after that. So.
Yeah, it was pretty short.
So we started with some, sort of work between us that we didn't even know was really there, and then the relationships formed. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, only amazing memories, and I do want to honor somebody that we lost a few years ago, Aaron Lemon.
Yeah.
Amazing guy.
Absolutely.
Very close friend to both of ours. And kind of a tragic casualty. And Meredith, his wife, is doing good. We're excited about that. But we have just mutual awesome memories of Aaron and can't wait to see him again one day, right?
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think, you and I had just kind of lightly kept in touch once, life pulled you out of Austin and life pulled us in different directions. We were sort of, knew what was going on, but that was about it. And then when our close friend Aaron unexpectedly fell ill and was, fighting for his life, and we landed in Dallas here, after jumping on the first plane we could get on. You and your wife were gracious and dropping everything and coming and picking us up and taking us straight to the hospital, and all of us being part of that really challenging 48 hours, and he lost the battle, and we lost an extremely close friend. Yeah. Those shared experiences, are things that also strengthen and oftentimes even form relationships. And so I felt like a lot of relationships were also strengthened, oddly enough, during that time with people who were in that orbit but had that shared experience together.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, let's digress a little bit, and I want to hear about little Levi.
Oh, man.
So I would love to just kind of go past, present, future a little bit with you.
Okay.
But then I also, Levi, I've done some research. I've listened to a lot of podcasts that you've been on, and you have got great things to say just about people management, excellence among people, and that kind of stuff. So I can't wait to get into that too. But to start out with, I would love to hear about your upbringing. I would love to hear you share some stories too, because you're a great storyteller. But tell me just kind of a little bit about the beginning of Levi.
Sure. So I really had an iconic Texan upbringing. So I grew up on a cattle ranch just outside of Austin. For people familiar with the area, it was really just the Salt Lick, which is a barbecue place, and the ranch I grew up on. That was all of what Driftwood was. And even then, the Salt Lick was a Monday through Friday lunchtime destination for local ranchers when Thurman was still alive, who's the founder of the Salt Lick, and he would come over from his adjacent ranch and he would cook barbecue on what is now the presentation pit at the main Salt Lick location in Driftwood. And so that's the environment I grew up in. We lived across the road from the offices and show barn that my dad was at, so much of the day, and was able to just jump in the truck with him innumerable times as a young kid to just, ride along with Dad and see what Dad was doing. So he would swing by, and I was, just there, just basically thumbing a ride, and jump in the truck and hang out with him and the rest of the folks at the ranch there. So that was really my upbringing. Absolutely, loved it.
High school, because I know, like, you ended up going to the University of Texas for your law degree.
Right.
So help me just kind of see how did that evolve to that? Like ranch hand, grow up to what was your, I guess, high school education?
Yeah. So I'll connect a few dots and kind of connect a dot on the ranching side. We just kind of told a story there, but I think what I was doing growing up on the ranch, I was just naturally a pretty observant kid. I was always interested in learning from what was happening around me, and part of what motivated me to do this is going to connect to what I was doing in high school and why I ended up in law school. I learned so much working alongside my dad as a leader. He never asked people to do things that he was unwilling to do. He worked alongside everybody. He would show people, what to do and how to do it. And he had extremely high standards. He was very attentive to the details. And, then every now and then would make some inextricable mistake, like, saying yes to some 4-H kids. But
he wasn't scared to take a risk.
He wasn't scared to take a risk. And he really did genuinely care about people and giving them opportunities. But the other thing that I observed about my dad that turned into a key insight and motivation for me is my dad really, really struggled explaining to people why he was doing what he was doing. So he had a difficult time. He would do it with you. Mm-hmm. He would show you by example. He would tell you, he was clear about what needed to be done and how it needed to be done. But he had a very difficult time telling you why it needed to be done that way, or why he was thinking about it a certain way. And so that went from riding a horse, do it like I do it, but he couldn't tell you why he's riding a horse the way that he's doing it. He couldn't tell you really, why he was, doing something in a particular way. And for me, what I observed is it really limited, in many ways, his ability to scale a team that was capable of doing things the way that he knew they needed to be done. Because unless he was with them, unless he was present, unless he was watching, unless he was doing the work with us, people didn't understand or know the deeper why. He just couldn't explain himself. You referenced, playing golf. The difference in a really good golf instructor being able to say, well, just swing like this. Yeah. And being able to explain why the swing mechanics would be, better if you do it this way, or why this issue with your tempo is affecting, you on the course. That's a big difference maker in terms of being able to equip and empower other people in an instructional context, let alone developing a team. So I became very interested very early in how to solve that problem and how to influence people and help people, as I describe it even today. People say, well, what's your job day in, day out? I said, my job is to help every individual at Franklin Building Supply, where I'm CEO at right now, to reach their God-given potential. That's my job. I do that for each individual, then collectively we're doing that, and we're succeeding as an organization. So my job is to help every individual reach their God-given potential. But I found that I was really interested in the art and the science of leading people well and really addressing the issue that I thought was a gap with how my dad led, which he just didn't know. He had didn't have an opportunity to go to college and to serve under other leaders. He kind of developed it on his own and developed so many good things. But anytime we're just kind of doing something on our own, we're likely to have some gaps. Yeah. And so I think that was a gap I saw. I was very interested in what it would look like to lead with an emphasis on spending time on the why. And so I did a lot of stuff related to leadership in high school. I did a lot of stuff related to leadership in college. By the time I got into college, what I wanted to become was the best possible leader I could be. That was what I was interested in doing. Now, that doesn't fit into a tidy, job path or job description or whatever, but that was my aspiration. Some people might want to become the best version of this athlete or the best engineer or whatever. I wanted to become the best leader that I could possibly be, and I was interested in the art and science of leadership and really obsessed with it from early college on. And so even in going to law school, I went to law school knowing that I did not want to practice law long term. But I felt like law had more to teach me and to help round out my perspective and my skill set to be the most effective leader, as opposed to just going further down the path of getting an MBA or something. Yeah. So for me,
why did you think law would help that?
Yeah, so a couple things. I started my first business when I was about 11, filed my first tax return. We had a conversation around the kitchen table about it sort of ended up catching my parents by surprise, and I earned too much to be a dependent, and learning about tax brackets, and my dad's tax bracket was higher than mine, and maybe this wasn't a good outcome for the family finances. I was interested in business very early on. And a lot of that had to do with growing up on the ranch, and also the owner of the ranch was, I think, interesting to me and generous with some of his times and thoughts about his background experience as a business person, and seeing my dad run this operation. What interested me about law school is, so I knew coming out of undergrad, I had a ton to learn about business. There's no question about that. But I didn't think I needed the discipline of an educational program to continue learning about business. Yeah. And so an MBA wasn't as attractive to me in that regard. And I was also concerned that maybe if I went out and worked for 2 years, I wouldn't actually come back. So law school gave me the opportunity to go straight in after undergrad. But without going too deep in this, basically law schools are kind of split into two broad categories, into theory and practice schools. University of Texas and most of kind of upper tier law schools are what they call theory schools, and they're teaching you a way to think rather than just what the law is. And so, I'm painting with some broad brushes here, but in terms of what was interesting to me, I thought the actual knowledge of kind of the legal landscape would be helpful in business and navigating a variety of things, but really learning how to hone a way of thinking where what you're doing is you're putting yourself as best as you can in a position in the future, and deciding today what you should do in terms of writing contracts or dealing with any type of legal issue, writing laws themselves, other things. What do you need to do today to take into account what this might look like 10, 15, 20 years from now? And so you're putting yourself in a future state and then backing up and thinking about how that shapes what you do today. And I think at the University of Texas Law School, I was able to just further hone that skill set and make that part of my repertoire. And I think I was just telling some folks last week I was meeting with in our organization, encouraging them to do something similar. What I find is that most people work from where they're at moving forward. It's very different to work from where you want to be and move backwards. But most people work from where they're at and they move forward. And I encourage folks to think about where they want to be and to work backwards from that position. So we can do that individually, or you can do that collectively as an organization.
That's really good. Well, I guess with that, because it seems like you had a pretty good vision as you approach college, as you approach law school, of who you wanted to be, which is awesome. So if you're mentoring somebody who's going into their freshman year of college right now,
sure,
what would be a piece of advice that you would give that person as they're approaching that season of education?
Yeah, I think finding what really energizes you is really important. Yeah. So there are lots of things you're going to have to do in life that just require sheer discipline.
Yeah.
But what really energizes you? And so if you're energized writing code, if you're energized solving math problems in engineering, if you're energized actually doing a deep dive into philosophy or anatomy or whatever it is, find what, and I think even sort of, really sort of calibrating and figuring out, is this life-giving or energizing to me? It's not to say that if you pursue that career path right, you're not going to have a lot of moments that just require sheer discipline to do what needs to be done. There are things about any of our roles that aren't are the funnest part of our job or the most energizing part of our job, but they're responsibilities we bear and we need to do them well. But where do you find energy? What is life-giving? So if you think about reaching your God-given potential, I start with the premise, both for myself and others, that they are created by God. They're given an imprint of things that they're that they're capable of doing or have some unique skill sets or abilities. And part of that, sort of journey during your adolescent years and getting into, I think, your early 20s and college and stuff, is trying to uncover what that is. And then leaning into that. And it may be for some people that doesn't fit with their aspirations in terms of income or their family expectations or other things, but do they have the courage to go down the path where they find that they get energy and they feel like they have a chance of this being life-giving to them? And I think that would be my encouragement to any students to figure out, is this life-giving to you, or is this an exercise in sheer discipline? And I don't sort of buy into, find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I kind of think that's a sort of an easy sort of platitude, but doesn't really mean much in practice. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's difficult about any path, but find what you think is life-giving, energizing. I think that's easier than saying find your purpose. Like, that sounds almost kind of too lofty, too aspirational. No, but I think a lot of folks can take a step back and say, am I energized by this, or is this wearing me out?
Yeah.
And if you find energy, I would encourage you to go further down that path.
No, that's really good. That's really good. I work with, some of your name is Kim Pacheco, and she has been watching these episodes, and she said, man, a really good question to ask would be, what makes you come alive? And I think that you may have already answered it, but I want to just ask you personally, like, what makes you come alive?
Well, I go back to my prior answer. I mean, what makes me come alive is putting people in a position day in, day out that helps them reach their God-given potential. And I spend, I think, maybe an inordinate amount of time going back to, what I shared about my story growing up, explaining the why to people. And sometimes the why is about themselves, helping them unpack that. It's not about my why, it's about their why. But going deeper with them to actually understand, why is it that we do the things we do, or why is it that you do the things that you do? The what and how, that's the easiest thing, but the problem is, as soon as I remove myself from that situation, they're paralyzed. Because, of course, the situation, the dynamics have changed, and they only knew what to do and how to do it if it looked exactly like it did before. But if you know the why, now you can take that new dynamic into account and still navigate that situation. I think that's true professionally, that's true personally. So whether you're dealing with an issue with friends or spouses or kids or relatives or whatever the case may be, or you're dealing with situations at work, if you have a deep understanding of your why you do or don't do what you do, why other people around you do or don't do what they do, you're in a position to navigate what is always a changing dynamic or landscape. I mean, I think we rarely deal with the same situation truly over and over again. It's a little different every time, and if you don't have the why, then you're going to stumble in how you navigate that situation. So I'm really energized by, and I come alive when I can spend my time helping people reach their potential and really understand the why for me or our organization, or the why for themselves. And one of the things I talk about is I encourage leaders to spend what I call an unreasonable amount of time with the people that they want to develop. And what I find in my peer group is that leaders are most often or more often trying to figure out how to spend the least amount of time to get the most results they're looking for with their people. And I think it's the wrong approach with people. So for senior leaders to think about, instead of what's the least amount of time I need to spend in a meeting with Matt, I think I can cover everything we need to in 20 minutes. Yeah. I'm thinking about, is there a way that I could spend 3 hours with Matt? Yeah. And can I fit 3 hours into the schedule? Can I give that person an unreasonable amount of time, which provides space for us to get beyond the what's in the house, right? All the action items and to-dos, and to get into the deeper whys, whether personally and professionally. And the more that I can help another person understand themselves well, especially if they're a leader, whether, on the org chart or even just of influence, they're going to be more effective and they can replicate and do the same. But it takes a tremendous amount of time. So I challenge other leaders in our organization and in my peer group when I'm around them at different events and other venues, to spend an unreasonable amount of time with the people around you who you want to impart the why to. You want to impart your DNA to in a way that's helpful for the organization. Don't try to figure out how to do this in the least amount of time necessary. Try to figure out how to organize your schedule so you can spend an unreasonable, and I use that word to be intentionally kind of provocative, to say, is that an unreasonable amount of time? Yeah. And until you cross that threshold, I don't think you've created enough space. If there's a more effective or efficient way to do what I'm talking about, I certainly from my side feel like I would have discovered it. Maybe it's still out there and I'll discover it later, but having done what I'm talking about for more than 20 years at this point, the only way I figured out how to get it done is to spend unreasonable amounts of time with the people that matter the most.
Well, it's very rare, and that's awesome. I mean, that you do that. I would say that I've been in positions where I've worked for people where there is zero blank space on their calendar. And so you're lucky to get 15 minutes with that person, right? But then I also have worked with people where they're intentional to have time, and it seems like you're likely one of those type of leaders for your employees. Have you run across a situation where you had an employee where their why didn't fit what they're doing or didn't even fit your organization at all?
Absolutely.
And you had to have a hard conversation probably, but it's probably a very meaningful conversation. Like, how do you go about that?
I without getting into details to be inappropriate. I mean, I had one of those just week before last with an employee that been with us for almost 25 years, and the deeper whys didn't align perfectly anymore. Still an absolutely outstanding person, made tremendous contribution to the organization, but the whys didn't align anymore, and we decided to in a way that we felt was respectful and generous, move on and allow this individual to do the same. But if there's not alignment around that why and around, for me, culture, which I define as what you expect and accept, as an organization, and I think that's true in any group of people. What do you expect and accept? What are all the unwritten sort of rules and, expectations? If there's not alignment there, they may be good at a particular task, but they're not a good fit for the organization anymore, and they're going to have an even more challenging time leading other people down the path you want everyone to go, right? So they're not only, in essence, a little bit of an obstacle for themselves, but they're now an obstacle for other people, or they may not be an obstacle standing in their way, but they can't help them get to where you want them to go because they're not going there themselves. As a leader, you can't take people to places you're not going. Yeah. So you can't lead from the back. You've got to lead from the front. You've got to, be able to articulate vision. You have to be able to explain the why. You have to be able to motivate. You have to provide an environment where there's healthy accountability, or what I describe as relationally constructive accountability. Is this relationship better after dealing with the conflict? That's relationally constructive. You have to be able to do that. And if you're not aligned on culture and the why and everything else, even if you're not an obstacle, you're going to be ineffective in taking people, down that path.
Well, let's get back into your story. I'm going to kind of say we're done with the college side. I know that you have essentially been an entrepreneur a lot of your life, correct? You seems like you are a born and nurtured leader because you've led a healthcare company and now a lumber yard.
Two different ends of the spectrum, right?
Yeah. So, which is really cool to me. But I'd like to go ahead and fast forward to now. You are the CEO of Franklin Building Supply in Idaho, and so what was you coming in? Obviously, a company that probably had a lot of legacy. You came in 40 years into the 40 plus
when
years.
When I came in, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary as a company.
Okay, and so just bring me into that experience of coming into a company that had a lot of legacy. I'm this new leader. I see that there's some things that need to change, but I also want to steward what's been good. I'd love to kind of get in your head a little bit there.
So there may be a few things I'd hit on there. So I think in any organization, if you're coming in as the next leader, no matter the setup, you're standing on the shoulders of people that have come before you. Now the challenge is sometimes those shoulders are in a deep hole and you're having to dig the organization out of that, and it's not that helpful. And so you're standing on their shoulders, but the problem is, they're 20 feet below ground level. In other organizations, you're standing on the shoulders of people who have developed and built a healthy organization, and they want it to go to the next level, and they know that they need a transition in leadership for that to happen. No one's an effective leader in perpetuity. So for a variety of reasons, there's a need for a new voice, a new direction, a new vigor, a new whatever the case may be. And so for Franklin, there were two founders. One of the founders had moved on several years after the founding of the company. So essentially the founder and then his son were the two leaders of the company in two 20-year stints, respectively. And so I was the first one coming in to lead the company that was not from the family. And it was when we'd also changed our ownership structure. So when I came in, you kind of could have hung up a new management and new ownership sign. At the end of 2015, Franklin Building Supply became a 100% employee-owned company, and then I arrived in January 2016. And so one, I think it's really important to recognize the legacy and to be truthful about what that legacy is. And if the legacy is not helpful and you find yourself in a deep hole, you need to be honest with yourself and the organization about that. If it's advantageous, you need to be honoring and respectful of that. One of the things I did when I came in is I went on what I call a listening tour for the first, effectively almost 3 months. I said next to nothing. All I did was listen. I went to each and every location and sat in front of every person I could get into a one-on-one or group conversation with. And at that time, really got in front of almost every employee in the company. And we're spread across all of Idaho, have a location in Nevada, hundreds of employees today, 600 plus employees. We've got, a lot of people out there, and we're spread out. So at that time, we were a little bit smaller, so it was a little bit easier in terms of just headcount, but the locations were still really spread out the same way. And so I spent those first few months on a listening tour before I came back to not only executive leadership team and the gentleman that I was going to be succeeding, but also a broader group of sales and operational leaders to share what my observations were. But I listened first. I think one of the other things that I would sort of point out in these kind of three things I'm highlighting here is that I think organizations focus on the wrong person in succession. They focus on the successor. They put a tremendous amount of resources in finding that person, depending on the size of the organization. They're trying to develop that person. They're trying to put the right, tools and, programs and support and training around them. And I am convinced if you look at situations, whether it's a privately held or publicly held company, and the publicly held companies are usually played out in a way that we can look and observe. The privately held ones, you kind of had to be there. But we obsess about the successor, and the key person in a successful transition is the person that's going to relinquish the power, the authority, the identity. And if that person is not mature enough, is not ready for that transition, I don't care who the successor is, it won't work. And so I think it should actually kind of be flipped in its emphasis. And I say this because I, one, compliment Rick, who I succeeded. His father, Dick, had been one of the two co-founders of the company. Rick had seen this done well with his dad and made improvements even on top of that. And how Rick handled this transition of leading a company for 20 years, but then handing over the reins to someone new, outside the industry, not from Idaho, not a member of the family, that was the difference maker. And so in any organization that's thinking about succession, whether it's at the CEO level or in other roles, the question I would be asking is the person that's relinquishing the power, authority, and their identity, are they ready for that? Are they mature enough for that? Are they going to do that in a way that's gracious, generous, supportive, healthy? They're the person that's going to make the difference. Yeah. Do you need to find a good successor? Absolutely. But I think honestly and I think this surprises a lot of people when I talk to them about this, that's the easier thing to do. Yeah. The harder thing to do is for the person that's in that seat now to willingly, with an open hand, say, this is yours now, steward it well. Yeah. And so I think Rick did an outstanding job there. If he had not, it didn't matter who I was. I think that's difficult to overcome.
Did Rick have pretty good support, or was he kind of on an island during that process?
No, he did have good support, but it's a lot about where he was at as a person. And so I have a lot of conversations with peers about succession. And I think they're surprised at where that conversation goes, because I say, do you know that succession is about you? Yeah. They're like, wait a minute, we're not talking about me. I'm wanting to know how to find the person in my organization or outside my organization that could sit in my seat. Yeah. So no, that's the easy part of this. Yeah. You're the hard part. Yeah. Where are you at? Are you ready for this? Do you want this? Can you actually do this in a healthy and constructive way? Can you see some of your sacred cows dismantled or reworked? Yeah. Things that, it really depends on the maturity and I think the character of the individual in the seat right now, and that does not get enough attention. If you look at like how public companies handle this, I think it's egregious how little attention's paid to who's giving it up, and all the attention's paid to who's coming in. And when you see that dynamic at work, the failure rate is shockingly high.
Well, locked in with the Dunning series, and we'll talk about it after this, but we're going through some succession stuff, and it has been done in an excellent way. It's just been
and it's
awesome
so important for an
witness.
organization, right, for that to be done well. And the more senior the role, the more potential there is either for great harm or great benefit in how that's done. Yeah. So I just finished reading Bob Iger's biography. And he's, I think, a year or so into having to come back into Disney after his hand-picked and their hand developed or intensely developed successor didn't work out. Yeah. And I don't know anything particular about that situation, but again, that scenario plays out over and over and over again in public and private companies, and I think. Absolutely, and it diminishes actual economic value. It does. I mean, it has real consequences, and I think what's missing is a lot more attention probably needed to be paid to where Bob Iger was at than where the successor was at. And I think maybe Bob Iger's someone that I look at from afar. Again, don't know anything in particular or more than anyone else does, but look at from afar and respect and admire as a leader in many ways. But again, that pattern of a CEO and a board thinking, oh, we found the right person, but they're not spending enough time thinking about, again, who's giving up all that power, authority, and identity. You just see a really high failure rate, and I don't see that as good leadership.
Well, I knew that I would get some good wisdom from you. I've always known you to be somebody that's just, you're not scared to look at things differently, but it's saturated in wisdom. And so I want to hear, let's talk about people a little bit. And I'd love to just kind of start it out by asking you about some of your philosophies around leading people? And I just want it to be an open question to you. So what are just some philosophies that you have around leading people?
So I really do believe that people are the difference maker in a business. I mean, maybe if you've got the formulary for the cure to cancer, no matter what your people are, you're going to be successful. But outside of that, it really is about your people. I think you do win with culture, but I think this is unfortunately something that's really easy for each and every business to say. I don't know that you and I could, in the city of Dallas, go find a business that has a placard up that says people don't matter.
Yeah.
We want to be clear. We've got great coffee. We could care less about our people. Everybody says this, and so there's a dilutive effect to everybody saying this. But what does it actually mean on a day-to-day basis? So one of the kind of key things that I talk with our team about is I believe firmly that the customer experience will never exceed the employee experience. And it's a really important math equation to understand. So the customer experience will never exceed the employee experience. And so what we look at in our business, and what I encourage other folks to consider doing, is to look at every aspect of their business and say, what is the experience that we want customers to have, right? So list out those things. And then we'll actually do this on a whiteboard, and I'll do this in 3 columns. So list out what are all the things that we want the customer experience to be. And some of that may be aspirational, reputational, stuff that you can, is really tangible, whatever the case may be. You list those things out. This is the desired customer experience for the whole organization, maybe a team, department, service sector, whatever it is. And then skip the middle column, leave that blank, go over to the right side and write down what employee experiences replicate the desired customer experience in your organization. So I'll give a really simple example. So let's say that you're a bank, and when someone comes up to the teller window, you want everybody greeted by name and with a smile. Okay, if it's a repeat, sort of customer, they come in every day to make their deposit, whatever, you want them greeted. Hey, Matt, good to see you again. A name and a smile. My question would be, when everybody walks into that bank in the morning, is every employee greeted by name and with a smile? Yeah. Because it turns out that whether you and I are 4 or 40, we are shaped by our environments. And if what we experience every day is that our leaders, our peers come in and say, hey, Matt, good to see you, that they don't have to do anything to actually get you to do the same thing with customers. Yeah. You're going to intuitively, you'd have to do a lot of mental and emotional gymnastics to not do this. You're going to intuitively simply replicate what you're experiencing every day with your customers. Yeah. But what I find is that too many businesses have some type of placard up saying, remember to greet everybody by name and smile. They're asking people to deliver an experience to customers that they do not deliver internally to their employees every day. So that's a simple example of when I say the customer experience will never exceed the employee experience. I want to connect the dots between those two, and then what I'll do in the middle column is inevitably whatever we want the customer experience to be, there will be some gaps with the employee experience. And we'll have to think about what do we do to close that gap? What do we change about how we walk into the building in the morning, or whatever the case may be, to deliver that same experience to customers or to employees that we want to deliver to customers? And if you can do it on the employee side, one of the fun things is all this, kind of policing and accountability and all these things that companies put a lot of time and effort into to deliver this customer experience will just start to happen naturally. And they start to happen. It's an overflow. It's genuine. Yeah. It's heartfelt. It's sincere. It's attentive to people. And so I think to me, it's so interesting when we think about business. We've got a collection of individuals, and they're all under the banner of a business, whether it's public, private, or whatever the case may be. And we just start to do some weird things because we're a business or organization now. Yeah. And we forget some of the basics, right? So if you were going out for a golf lesson and things weren't going well, I'm really just talking about myself now. So I want to talk about you. So when I'm going out for a golf lesson and things aren't going well, which is not a hard scenario to imagine, there's a reason that, a good golf coach is going to go back and start to look at the basics. How are we gripping the club? What's the stance like, right? Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. And if these things are in really good shape, well, then we can build on that. In a business, too often, we just forget that we're dealing with people. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with humanity. We're dealing with people that are often irrational. We're dealing with people that have lots of things going on outside of work. So I tell folks, I'm not asking you to cross a threshold and become a different person. I tell folks, I don't think anyone deserves the unrestrained version of me. That's unfair and selfish. But they deserve the genuine and sincere version of me. I shouldn't feel an expectation to be a different person at work than I am in life, let alone leave at the door what's going on in my life to quote unquote, be a pro today. We encourage folks to be authentic and genuine, to share with their colleagues, their supervisors, what's actually going on, not to just try to put on a good face. Think about how much time we spend at a workplace dealing with things that have nothing to do with work. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Matt just now doesn't seem to care about, this project anymore, and I don't think he gets the point, and he doesn't understand how this is going to impact whatever. And the real issue is that something's going on with your kid. And it's taken a lot out of you, and you and your wife aren't getting good night's sleep, over the last few weeks, and it's, just depleting you. Yeah. How you think about this project hasn't changed, but what we'll tell ourselves in a business environment is this just has to do with work. Yeah. Right? And so treat people like people. That sounds it, but we're human beings. Yeah. Why are we trying to pretend that somehow we come together in an office building and we can be something else? We can't. Yeah. So, life's difficult enough solving real problems. I don't need to spend a lot of time solving made-up ones. Yeah. We really try to encourage our folks to understand where they and their colleagues are at, what's actually going on. It requires a little bit more vulnerability and transparency in the workplace, and there are appropriate levels for that, to be sure. But let's actually treat people as human beings here, not as robots that put on a particular, type of attire today and become something else because we're on the clock. I think that's just naive.
So it seems like you're the type of leader that when a job's not getting done, you're probably going to first reflect internally of what aren't we doing to allow the job to get done.
I'm going to assume that that's the thing that needs to be explored first.
Yeah.
Right?
And there's probably some situations where, the job's just not getting done. But from what I've heard, you talk about before is inputs versus outputs.
Yeah.
Okay. And it seems like you focus a lot on the inputs.
Yes.
Feel free to kind of share a little bit of that philosophy. I know it lends into everything that we've already talked about, but then I'd like to hear some mechanics of some inputs that you've had a good experience of that, might just be easy little inputs that people can learn from.
Sure.
So
I think this is another sort of oddity in business where we obsess over the outputs, and we want to deliver certain outputs. So I think, I'd certainly raise my hand and say sports metaphors can be overused in business, but they're a familiar context for most people, and so they can be a helpful reference point. So here, I'd say, imagine if you're a professional sports team. I'm here in Dallas. I was telling you before we started this that, it's been a long while since I've had a great football weekend where both my Longhorns and the Cowboys won. So, imagine the Cowboys only caring about wins and losses. Mm-hmm. They don't practice. They don't do drills. They don't work out. They just show up on Sunday and demand a victory. That doesn't, I think maybe they've actually kind of done something like that before. Maybe that explains some of the, yeah.
Sounds like Jerry.
Right, it sounds a little bit like, but that all of us would recognize that's not going to lead to success. Mm-hmm. But in business, we oftentimes do something pretty similar. Mm-hmm. We just focus on the outputs. And so what I, kind of preach in our organization is we obsess about the inputs. So I want to know what the practice is like. I want to know how we're handling nutrition. what type of weights we're lifting, what the scrimmages are like, how we're, doing all the work leading up to the moment that we're actually performing. That's going to drive our performance. That's going to take care of the output. But obsess about the inputs. And there are a lot of businesses that do a great job of this, I think, but that you obsess about the inputs. It's just, again, peculiar that in a business context, even though I think we would all take a step back and affirm that we should obsess about the inputs, and that's what's really going to matter. In my example about the Cowboys, yeah, that would be crazy if that's what they did. All of a sudden, we ride an elevator, up in an office tower with our business attire on, and that's essentially what we do. We just focus on the outputs. We're not obsessing about the inputs. So, really getting into the weeds and getting your hands dirty with your team about what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to actually equip our people with the things that they need, to train them, support them, provide the right accountability, provide them the right coworkers to the left and right, give them supervisors that are actually adding value instead of just being someone that's perceived in so many organizations as somebody that's just paid a little bit more to do less work. So really looking at, for us, what are all those inputs that end up in our business, determining the quality of an output, which is dropping off load of material at a job site so everyone in the trades can continue building a home. That's often our output. We have manufacturing and retail and install as well. But that's really an output. Well, let's and again, in a business, what I find is even let's talk about like KPIs and other things, right? So businesses will want to have, I think one of the just absolutely most ridiculous things that people say in business is what gets measured gets done. You and I do a lot of things that don't get measured that matter a whole lot more than business. So it's just this kind of story we're telling ourselves, every day.
Parenthood,
right.
marriage.
Yeah. So we don't measure those things in a quantitative way, and that's the only reason we're attentive to them. We're attentive to those things because they matter to us. Yeah. The consequences matter. The people matter, right? And if you can bring that into your business, but if you don't have that in your business, you're just having to measure all the outputs. So even the KPIs, all the KPIs in most businesses are focused on outputs. Yeah. They're not measuring the inputs, they're measuring the outputs. So now where's the emphasis in the organization? You need to do both to be sure, but my point is, really obsess about the inputs. The inputs will drive the desired outputs in the organization. And I think you've got to get comfortable too with inputs that aren't all quantitative by nature. A lot of them are qualitative. And I find, again, in a business, a lot of business leaders, or you talk to a lot of people maybe in HR context, they're uncomfortable with qualitative measures. Yeah. So if I can't write down an objective number here, I don't want to deal with it because this is messy. This has to do with people, and we're in business here. But I thought you just said that people were the most important thing in your business. Yeah. But now we're dealing with people.
It just doesn't fit on a spreadsheet.
It doesn't fit on a spreadsheet, right? The qualitative issues are more often than not, particularly on the input side, the bigger, opportunities and the things that need more attention and focus. And so I think as business leaders or in an HR department or whatever your context, you've got to get really comfortable with the qualitative side of assessing people, of evaluating where people are at, of investing in people. And again, in business, the gravitational pull is output KPIs, quantitative measures, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, or does get measured does get done. You know what, when we step foot in this office building, we're not people anymore. We're going to say we're people, but we're not actually people. We're going to build an entire structure that's not built for people and then wonder why this isn't working the way that we want it to. Yeah. And I think there's an opportunity and a need for every leader to take a step back and say, have I created a structure, an environment, and a culture that is actually disconnected from the realities of humanity and what the day-to-day life is like for my people? And it's not just work, it's what's going outside of work. And people are irrational. There's a complex mix of, motivations and emotions and, dynamics and politics and all these sorts of things. It's a mess. Yeah. Do you want to get into the mess as a leader? Or do you want to just say, you know what, that's messy, So I'm just going to pretend that people are robots clothed in human skin, and at least while we're in this office building, we're going to interact with one another like we're, in a way that we don't outside of this building. And I think that's that's ineffective.
Well, for me, like there's, with what I do, there's kind of three main areas that we have influence on. It's cost, service, and people. And when I talk about the people side, it might be a smaller organization, it might be a large organization. The conversation starts with, don't underestimate the influence that you have on the lives of your people. They're likely spending more time with you than they are with their families.
Right.
Like we have to take the people side seriously. And I think what you're saying is that when you take that people side as seriously as you do, then those people come to work excited to work. They enjoy work. Work can be even a sanctuary for them,
Right.
Well,
we
and
talk
then
about,
what comes out of that is just this unbelievable customer experience too.
Yeah, so I talk about we want people to leave work in better condition than they arrived. Yeah. Most people's experience in the workplace, if we want to be honest with one another for a second here, is that work is depleting. Yeah. They leave the day in worse condition than they arrived. They feel undervalued, underappreciated. They had to deal with abuse from somebody. They're under-resourced. They're not trained adequately. They don't have the right people to the left and right of them. And oh, by the way, they're not the ones that hired those people or make decisions about firing them either. They have a supervisor that's a joke, right? I mean, these are real experiences that people have, whether we're talking about jobs in an office tower like this, looking over the city, or somebody working on one of the construction sites down below like I deal with all day long. That's the reality of so many people in the workplace. And so our desire, and we certainly, I'm not naive to the fact that we don't execute on this 100% of the time. We fail with the best of them. But my expectation and what I hold our leaders accountable to is to build and maintain an environment where people leave in better condition than they arrived. And so that flip, thinking about how work should be life-giving, work should motivate people, work should encourage people, right? And this is not about being, people will be, oh, that sounds kind of soft. And I said, well, because you don't want to deal with the mess of humanity, you've become really hard. Yeah. And so your criticism of this technique is just because you don't have enough of a tool set to actually engage in this, or you don't like dealing with the mess of humanity. But that's who's showing up at your workplace every day. Yeah. So how are you leading them well? And leading them through fear and a culture of fear and other things that kind of ripple out from that. Like all you are doing is assembling a group of people who have no other options in life, who are willing to put up with this. And I will go against that team every day of the week, right? Because that team is not going to perform as well as my team. So I think that's a limitation of that leader. So if someone's looking at this and saying, well, that sounds kind of soft, again, this is just about people. Yeah. This is about the mess of humanity. This is about the complex mix of things going on in your work environment, whether you lead a team of 10 or a team of 1,000 or whatever it is. This is going on, whether you want it to be going on or not. This is just life. Life is messy. And so how do you engage in that as a leader? And can you flip the script and instead of trying to minimize how much harm you do to people when they come in every day, you flip it to the other side and you say, how much good can we do? One of the things I talk about with our team too is this concept that I described as max extraction or max contribution. And in a max extraction environment, so I was in DC one time visiting a friend of mine from law school, and we were at the Department of Labor. Okay, she worked for the Department of Labor at the time. So, this is the headquarters for the department that issues all the rules and regulations that we're all obliged to be attentive to, and so they're committed to doing this perfectly. Yeah. And so, here's this government office building, and when 5 o'clock hits, this office building dumps out. People are not there a minute later. Mm-hmm. And what I find is that people in private business will look at that and they're like, oh my gosh, I mean, yeah, that's what's wrong with government work. But what I challenge them to think about is, what does the morning there look like? The morning is that if somebody shows up early, they don't allow them to clock in. They only allow them to clock in exactly at 9 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And if they clock in at 9:01, they're going to write them up. Well, what do you think they're going to do at 5 o'clock now if that's their experience in the morning? I showed up at 9:01 and I'm getting penalized. I'm going to make sure you don't get an extra minute from me when the day's done. Yeah. So those are linked, but we just see the afternoon and tell ourselves, oh, that's a typical government worker. Well, why don't you show up in the morning and watch how they're treated in the morning? Yeah. And so whether we think about, some government departments, whether state or federal, or some businesses that we've all probably had experiences with, you can feel a max extraction environment, which is, I don't trust you. I'm trying to get everything I can from you. Your time is mine. I'm renting you for today, and I will make sure that I get everything I should out of you and you don't cheat me out of a dime. That's the environment they operate in. That is max extraction. So what is the employee going to do if that's the type of environment they work in? They're also going to try to extract as much from you as you are from them. Yeah. They don't trust you. They're going to make sure that you don't get an extra dime from them, all the things. And so it's a quid pro quo. Yeah. You can flip to the other side, which is what we talk about being a max contribution environment. And what we try to do when we talk, give language to this in our organization is, how can we get into a giving contest with our employees where we're trying to outgive them? Mm-hmm. We're trying to be generous towards them. Abundance. We're trying to make assumptions in their favor. We're assuming best intent. Now, we still have to deal with, absolutely, do we have employees that don't show up on time and those type of things? You've got to deal with that. And again, in a relationally constructive way, and I think accountability, if there's anything I can look at an organization to assess how healthy their culture is how well they handle accountability. Is it destructive or is it constructive? You need accountability. You need people to perform. This is a business. We're here to make money, just like a sports team's trying to pile up, W's instead of, losses. But, the issue is, do you create an environment where you actually understand them as a person? You treat them as a human being. You're trying to figure out how to outgive, to your point, have a culture of abundance, and and what you'll see is employees also respond in kind to that environment. And so now you desperately want them to stay on the job site for an extra 20 minutes past their normal, end of day to get the job done at that job site. Well, if you're generous to them in the morning, they'll be generous to you in the afternoon. If you understood why that morning they called in and said, hey, I'm going to be running about 20 minutes late. Here's what happened with my, kid. Transportation to school fell apart. I think, my wife and I have been separated for a while. Like, if that's the conversation you just had and this person doesn't have, a pattern, like I'd say there's a difference between problems and patterns. As soon as we got a pattern, that's a whole different issue. Right? That's a problem that person has. Okay, hey, appreciate you giving me a call, giving me a heads up. We'll cover you for these next 20 minutes. What do you think that person's going to do at the end of the day? Whether today or later this week or next month. Mm-hmm. They're going to give you that extra time. They're going to put in the extra effort. In a max extraction environment, again, they're just responding to how you treat them. Yeah. And so be careful when you're criticizing everybody walking at the door at 5. Think about how you handle them when they walk in the door at 9. And so
the input piece.
Absolutely. So we talk about this difference between a max extraction and max contribution. And when we talk about having a people-centric business, I think if you can develop and maintain a max contribution environment, you're going to get more of what people can bring to the table every day. So, something else kind of related to that, as you're talking about just kind of how we think about people, I think that most employees also kind of come to work bringing less than their full potential to the table every day because they have to save a little bit to protect themselves from how the organization or the people around them may take advantage of them. They have to be on guard. Mm-hmm. They can't be naive about how, the politics are playing out, and is this person going to stab them in the back, and, all these different things. And then they've got life going on. So I think the average employee, this is not a scientific study, this is just, my sort of assessment of observing
it's probably better
a lot of business. Right? Yeah, we joke in the business, I'm pretty good at back of the napkin math. Like, well, I'll be talking with my CFO, and I've done a back of the napkin math calculation, and it's whatever the number's like 18.2%, and he comes up with 18.3. So I have a pretty good track record with back of the napkin math, but I'm not sure that this fits. But I think most employees are only bringing about 2/3 to maybe 75% of what they could to the job every day. When you think about just engagement, energy, all the things we want to see in a healthy workplace or team. And so I'm thinking about what's standing in the way of bringing all that other stuff to the table. If you're in an environment where you feel like people are looking out for you rather than you having to look out for yourself, if you're in an environment where trust is high, if you're in an environment with good people to the left and right of you, if you're in an environment where the supervisors and managers are not a joke, if you're in an environment that demands accountability and performance, those are things that allow you to bring more of yourself to the table every day and to contribute more, because you don't have to hold as much back to be on guard against the organization working against you, or you getting taken advantage of, or whatever else is kind of going on behind the scenes. So I think a lot of people are leaving a lot on the table because they don't feel like they can fully lean in. And you can imagine this in a relationship, right? What does a marriage look like if the partners don't feel like they can be all in on the marriage? Well, that's a marriage that's on a path towards ending. They can't both be all in, they can't extend full trust, they can't be fully vulnerable with their partner. They're not going to get everything out of that relationship and marriage that they could get. It might be okay, it might be functional, but it's not what it could be. And again, it's not that different in a work environment. If they're holding a lot back, they're only telling you part of the story, they're only letting you in a little bit, they're only known to a few, there's no trust, that's all stuff that's, they're leaving off the table. So now let's apply some math. So business people love the math part. So if, you look at your workforce, you got 100 people, and let's be generous. Let's say that they're bringing 75% of what they could to the table. Now, 25% on a daily basis, you're not tapping into. Yeah. So you got 100 people. Think about it like you're paying an extra 25 people a day to cover for the fact that you're only tapping into 75% of what people could bring to the table instead of 100. I think 100's, extremely difficult to get to. But I think you can get into the, high 80s or 90s. We're always going to have stuff going on outside of work. We can never be fully present in the way that we, think we are. But you can get into 80s or 90s. Those are real dollars. You're actually paying for additional labor because you haven't created an environment that allows people to bring themselves fully to the workplace and to be fully engaged. And so, there are lots of studies out there looking at this a lot of different ways, showing the cost of, what, frequently be described as disengagement. I think it's real, but I think to me it goes squarely on the shoulders of whoever's in that, top leadership seat, whatever the title is, CEO at most companies. They're the keeper of the culture. Yeah. The business is delivering the results that it's designed to deliver, and you're the designer. Yeah. There's no one else to blame.
Do you feel like you can be a better designer being in a privately held company?
I do feel like I have more flexibility. So early in my career, I decided that I wasn't really interested in going, down the path of, leading a public company or getting in that sort of position. There's some advantages with a public company, but I think for me, in terms of what's a fit, and going back to your earlier conversation about what's life-giving, I do not enjoy the quarterly pace, which requires public companies to be, a little bit more focused on the short term than the long term. I'm very long-term oriented with respect to development of our people and the development and progress of our organization. So I tend to think in years and decades, not months and calendar quarters. So it's a better fit for me, and I have some additional flexibility there with a private company, and all the more with a 100% employee-owned company. It's an opportunity where I'm not challenging and motivating people to reach their potential individually, and then we reach our potential as an organization so that I or someone else can reap, some windfall benefits from that, or some shareholders that they've never even met before. I'm able to tell our folks with conviction and sincerity that they will be the beneficiaries because they are the owners of the company. And so I think that's also a significant structural advantage for us.
That's great, man. I think we've gone to, a lot of really good places. I would love to just kind of start wrapping it up, and I'd like to hear where your mind and heart is 10, 20 years from now for Franklin Building Supply, for you.
Sure.
What's the future looking like?
Yeah. I don't think my crystal ball is better than anybody else's. Mine's as broken as everyone's is. But some major themes that I think we're focused on, particularly in our industry. We really do have a housing crisis in the U.S. Mm-hmm. We are undersupplied on housing. We have a huge affordability problem. And so we're in this industry, and we're part of helping homes get built in communities that we live and operate in all day long. And so I view that as an opportunity and an obligation. And so I'm engaged in some things in our community and across the industry to try to, help figure out how do we unlock some additional kind of innovation and creativity and new solutions, right, to be able to be part of the solution. And I'm a big believer in, shouldn't be lamenting or complaining about something that you're not willing to, be part of solving. And, so that for me is something that I'm really interested in as we look at the next kind of 10, 15 years. The other big theme for me is that I really do believe that the organizations who get the people piece right, and this is not a platitude, this is not a placard, this is about the day-to-day work, all those inputs, having the culture, the environment, the leadership that really does build an organization where people can bring their full selves to bear each and every day and contribute their best work and reach their, again, as I describe it, God-given potential. The organizations that do that over the next 10 to 15 years will be the winners. And so I think when you look at how for, basically a generation now, we've been below the replacement rate in terms of birth rate in the U.S. We're below 2. It's like a basic, requirement of humanity to be able to replace yourself. And somehow we're failing at that. But we're below 2. You look at, what a mess immigration is. You look at the very tail end of the baby boomers, wrapping up retirement right now. There is a real scarcity of labor. And again, I think the best organizations are going to attract the best labor. And other organizations that aren't attentive to this, that don't have the right leadership, the right focus, the right emphasis on this, they're going to be left with a labor force that is just not very competitive. Again, no different than just, kind of pulling two teams together on a schoolyard playground. If you've got all the better athletes, everybody's bigger, stronger, faster, you're going to win the game. And so in the same way here in a business context, I think if you've got a better pool for people that have the best potential, are the most motivated, are interested in working with the best people, no matter your industry or context, again, from construction all the way to the top of a tower, whatever that context is, whoever wins on the people side of business, I think will have a huge competitive advantage over the next 10 to 15 years. I think that's been emerging for some time now, but we're kind of in crunch time. And I think there's some folks that don't really see that coming with as much clarity as they should, that this is a huge issue. And I'm a big fan. While I want to use some of what I'm talking about today as a competitive advantage, what I'm really motivated by is challenging other, one of my key motivations is challenging other leaders and organizations to do the same, because I want the workplace to be dramatically better for a lot more people. And I think from a faith standpoint for me, from my early childhood and other things that drew me towards leadership, I can't just want that for my own organization. I genuinely and sincerely want that for every organization, and I hope that more people really look at what they could do to reshape how they operate and their culture and how they think about people to create exceptional workplaces. So I think we do all win if that's the case. This isn't something where it's like, well, I've got some little secret over here and I just want to hoard it. I don't think in my view, I don't think that's fair, healthy, or appropriate. And I know what we're doing, and we're continuing to march down this path, and I'm happy to hopefully, in a way that is approachable, challenge other people to consider doing the same, and provide them a little bit of resourcing and equipping to maybe go down that path. So.
Yeah, I love it, man. I mean, the world's only going to get harder for our people, right?
Yep.
And I think engaging people, getting people to bring their best selves to the workplace is only going to get harder. And so thank you so much for your abundant conversation today that a lot of people are going to be able to learn from. And I mean, I can't wait for everybody to listen to this, and I really appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, this was an absolute blast. I appreciate the good excuse to just have a conversation and burn orange, and
no, it's pretty good.
Obnoxious for fans of every other sort of team out there. But no, I appreciate that you're doing this, sitting down with a variety of people, helping get their stories out there and to share, I think, good, actionable content with folks. So appreciate you being willing to sit down and having me here today. So
awesome,
thank you.
man. Well, welcome to the excellence culture.
Okay, thanks.